Um, Bringing up Venezuela, and it was interesting that he chose Venezuela because earlier in the week, also with Venezuela collapsing, Venezuela has now chosen to dump the U.S. dollar. And you might say, well, why is this a big deal? Why does it matter, especially with a country collapsing? But it is a big deal because Venezuela still has a lot of oil, even though they're rich in oil, even though their country is poor and collapsing. They have plenty of natural resources. And there's some speculation that this might shift the beginning of countries starting to collude and to move away from the U.S. dollar, which I figured would probably happen sooner or later. I mean, our countries went from $4 trillion in debt in 2000 to around 20 trillion or more now, 17 years later. So we have seriously devalued our dollar. And there's talks about BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, Iran, China, South Africa, maybe coming up with a currency or maybe a union where they basically create a currency or create a situation that can compete with the United States dollar. So it's interesting, something to keep an eye on. A lot of brinksmanship, I think, is going on right now between the United States and Venezuela. I mean, Trump went as far as to say we'd consider invading him, which, probably not on the table, but Trump says everything's on the table all the time, so he'll say stuff like that. If anything, to keep people guessing. But that's what's going on with Venezuela. Venezuela's brought up in Trump's UN speech as an example as a failed socialist state, and Venezuela dumped the United States dollar. So anyway, I think it's something to keep an eye on, something interesting. Moving along, in media, I wanted to get away from having any kind of segments in the show, just touch stories on. But I think if I could have a segment for the show, it would just be fake news or policing the media, or because it's always about policing the media, especially during these narrative-driven weeks when there aren't events that drive the news. So everything's about narrative. So earlier in the week, this interesting back and forth, the Trump administration appears vindicated. Donald Trump came out earlier in the year and said that, hey, I'm being wiretapped, I'm being surveilled, I'm being spied on by the Obama Department of Justice and elements within the government. And this is before and after the election. Highly unconstitutional, very illegal. I mean, to put it in perspective, this is what any hardcore communist country, what Mao's China or Stalin's Russia would do. I mean, it's to basically take away the privacy of their political enemies and punish them when they're exposed, when their secrets are exposed or their private correspondence or whatever it is. So Trump made this accusation, and the mainstream media jumped on Trump right away, calling it a lie, calling just basically, basically both sides pointing at each other and calling each other liars. Fine, fair enough. Since then, we've seen the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. We've seen the director of the FBI, James Comey, make contradicting statements. In Comey's case, in testimony to Congress, and in James Clapper's case on television, contradicting comments about wiretapping, about surveillance, and Donald Trump. And even the New York Times, in an article on January 20th, printed a headline basically boasting that Trump had been wiretapped, had been surveilled, and that is where a dossier of information that would ultimately be used against the president for impeachment, the source was from that wiretapping, that surveillance. The problem was the president, when the media started saying that they had this dossier, this information that would prove that the president had committed a crime, the president said, well, that's illegal to wiretap me. And the media backed off, and you saw the Democrat Party back off, or I'd say the DNC or the Deep State or the Department of Justice, prior to Trump's Department of Justice, which is still really, for the most part, the previous Department of Justice. But putting that aside, it's become a big mess for James Clapper and James Comey, certainly. The media I would say it's a big mess for them too, but they really don't care anymore when they get caught lying. So they've been caught in another lie, and this just reaffirms CNN is fake news, corporate media is fake news, NBC, CBS, ABC, all the same players um, that called Trump a liar for saying that he wasn't surveilled or spied on, and this is also part of the much bigger story that's far more concerning to Americans, which is our Fourth Amendment, put in English, our right to privacy. And this started with Edward Snowden and the NSA, and the ability that we have because of the technology that we have to surveil everybody with cell phones, through computers, and what they call metadata, and that's just basically recording everything and then going and accessing that data um, when it would become relevant or necessary. And so there's the big issue is the Fourth Amendment. Where are we going to draw these lines? Clearly, to have a federal government, a central government spying on a presidential candidate before and after that candidate becomes president, a private citizen, that's some scary stuff. That's some communist Russia, communist Chinese, North Korean kind of stuff going on there, and we don't want to continue to go down that path. That's the reason we have a Fourth Amendment, and that's why that's how all these stories tie in together. So I just wanted to talk about that briefly, and just closing out the week. There's an Obamacare vote going on in the House of Representatives. It's been pretty incredible since Trump has taken office. We have not been able to get a bill out of the House and Senate on Obamacare or other issues. And, we know the issue here was the establishment government, the government before Donald Trump took over as president, is basically still working together as best they can to stonewall the Trump agenda, which is a nationalist agenda, America first, citizens first. And, and they're doing it with sabotage, and they're doing it by not passing the Trump agenda, which is fine. That's how this government works. So what we have to do in 2018 is vote those people out. I'm not sure what game is being played behind the scenes. It's been real frustrating with the Congress, and for the president to try to pass his agenda. So there's no doubt about that. I would say the Trump agenda isn't all that much different than the Republican agenda of 2014. When we voted all these guys into the House of Representatives and into the Senate, there seemed to be a lot of agreement with the 2004 agenda of the Republican Party and Trump's agenda in 2017, but for whatever reason, bills aren't being passed. So Obamacare is going to vote today, and there seems to be more struggle. There's intrigue about Rand Paul going back and forth, and it looks like John McCain's going to shut down the vote. I would say Rand Paul, I'm a Rand Paul fan, so I would say Rand Paul probably didn't vote for the bill on principle, and John McCain, I don't know what his reason for not voting on the bill, but either way, it doesn't even matter. I don't know what was in the bill. Nobody knows what was in the bill. Clearly, there's a lot of articles written about this and that, but it doesn't look like we're going to get a bill passed, which builds the story of just more frustration. We're not getting anything out of the legislative branch right now. And that's disappointing for us Republicans who voted Republicans into the House and Senate in 2014. And that's why we got Trump into office. We know what Trump's agenda is. We do know what the delay is in the House and the Senate. We don't know how to get through all that yet. But anyway, that's going on. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.